Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt, a First Chapter Friday video with The Word Nerd. Today, as you listen, watch for the story quote that will appear on screen. Write it down word by word, and then follow the instructions given to you by your teacher. Hi, my name's Amanda Zieba. Welcome to my channel, Learning with the Word Nerd, and another First Chapter Friday video. This week I'm going to be sharing with you the prologue in chapters 1 and 2 of Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. Now, I know the story was written a long time ago. It was first published in 1975, before even I was born. But it is a classic, and children have been loving it for a long time, and I know schools are still teaching it, so I wanted to share it with you. In fact, my own son read it last year in his school, so I know this to be true for sure. To give you an idea of what the story is about, I'll read you the back, and then we'll jump right into the story. Doomed to, or blessed with, eternal life after drinking from a magic spring, the Tuck family wanders about trying to live as inconspicuously and comfortably as they can. When 10-year-old Winnie Foster stumbles on their secret, the Tucks take her home and explain why living forever at one age is less a blessing than it might seem. Complications arise when Winnie is followed by a stranger who wants to market the spring water for a fortune. Now, I said I'm going to read you the prologue. The prologue is a little piece that comes before a story. Not all books have them, but some do. And in it, the author wants to share with you maybe a hint or foreshadow at something important that's going to come later, or they want to give you some background information. The prologue is meant to prepare the reader for the experience ahead. And here's what this one has to say. The first week of August hangs at the very top of summer. The top of the livelong year, like the highest seat of a Ferris wheel when it pauses in its turning. The weeks that come before are only a climb from balmy spring, and those that follow a drop to the chill of autumn. But the first week of August is motionless and hot. It is curiously silent, too, with blank white dawns and glaring noons and sunsets smeared with too much color. Often at night there is lightning, but it quivers all alone. There's no thunder, no relieving rain. These are strange and breathless days, the dog days, when people are led to do things they are sure to be sorry for later. One day at that time, not so very long ago, 3 things happened, and at first there appeared to be no connection between them. At dawn, May Tuck set out on her horse for the wood at the edge of the village of Tree Gap. She was going there, as she did once every 10 years, to meet her 2 sons, Miles and Jessie. At noontime, Winnie Foster, whose family owned the Treewood Gap, lost her patience at last and decided to think about running away. And at sunset, a stranger appeared at the Fosters' gate. He was looking for someone, but he didn't say who. No connection, you would agree, but things can come together in strange ways. The wood was, at the center, the hub of the wheel. All wheels must have a hub. A Ferris wheel has one, as the sun is the hub of the wheeling calendar. Fixed points they are, and best left undisturbed, for without them nothing holds together. But sometimes people find this out too late. Chapter 1. The road that led to Tree Gap had been trod out long before by a herd of cows who were, to say the least, relaxed. It wandered along in curves and easy angles, swayed off and up in a pleasant tangent to the top of a small hill, ambled down again between fringes of bee-hung clover, and then cut sideways across a meadow. Here its edges blurred. It widened and seemed to pause, suggesting tranquil bovine picnics, slow chewing and thoughtful contemplation of the infinite. And then it went on again and came at last to the wood. But on reaching the shadows of the first trees, it veered sharply, swung out in a wide arc as if for the first time it had reason to think where it was going, and passed around. On the other side of the wood, the sense of easiness dissolved. The road no longer belonged to the cows. It became instead rather abruptly the property of people. And all at once the sun was uncomfortably hot, and the dust oppressive, and the meager grass along its edges somewhat ragged and forlorn. On the left stood the first house, a square and solid cottage with a touch-me-not appearance, surrounded by grass cut painfully to the quick, and enclosed by a capable iron fence some 4 feet high, which clearly said, "Move on, we don't want you here." So the road went humbly by and made its way past cottages more and more frequent, but less and less foreboding, into the village. But the village doesn't matter, except for the jailhouse and the gallows. The first house is only the important one. The first house, the road, and the wood. There was something strange about the wood. If the look of the first house suggested that you'd better pass it by, so did the look of the wood, but for quite a different reason. The house was so proud of itself that you wanted to make a lot of noise as you passed and maybe even throw a rock or two. But the wood had a sleeping, otherworldly appearance that made you want to speak in whispers. This, at least, is what the cows must have thought. Let it keep its peace. We won't disturb it. Whether the people felt that way about the wood or not is difficult to say. There were some, perhaps, who did, but for the most part, the people followed the road around the wood because that was the way it led. There was no road through the wood. And anyway, for the people, there was another reason to leave the wood to itself. It belonged to the Fosters, the owners of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, and it was therefore private property in spite of the fact that it lay outside the fence and was perfectly accessible. The ownership of the land is an odd thing when you come to think of it. How deep, after all, can it go? If a person owns a piece of land, does he own all the way down in ever-narrowing dimensions till it meets all the other pieces in the center of the earth? Or does ownership consist only of a thin crust under which the friendly worms have never heard of trespassing? In any case, the wood, being on top, except of course for its roots, was owned, bud and bough, by the Fosters in the Touch-Me-Not cottage, and if they never went there, if they never wandered among the trees, well, that was their affair. Winnie, the only child of the house, never went there, though she sometimes stood inside the fence carelessly banging a stick against the iron bars and looked at it. But she had never been curious about it. Nothing ever seems interesting when it belongs to you, only when it doesn't. And what is interesting anyway about a slim few acres of trees? There will be a dimness shot through the bars of sunlight, a great many squirrels and birds, a deep, damp mattress of leaves on the ground, and all the other things just as familiar, if not so pleasant, things like spiders and thorns and grubs. In the end, however, it was the cows who were responsible for the wood's isolation, and the cows, through some wisdom they were not wise enough to know that they possessed, were very wise indeed. If they had made their road through the wood instead of around it, then the people would have followed the road. The people would have noticed the giant ash tree at the center of the wood, and then, in time, they'd have noticed the little spring bubbling up among its roots in spite of the pebbles piled there to conceal it. And that would have been a disaster, so immense that this weary old earth, owned or not to its own fiery core, would have trembled on its axis like a beetle on a pin. Chapter 2. And so, at dawn, that day in the first week of August, May Tuck, who woke up early and lay for a while beaming at the cobwebs on the ceiling, at last she said aloud, "The boys will be home tomorrow." May's husband, on his back beside her, did not stir. He was still asleep, and the melancholy creases that folded his daytime face were smooth and slack. He snored gently, and for a moment the corners of his mouth turned upward in a smile. Tuck almost never smiled, except in his sleep. May sat up in bed and looked at him tolerantly. "The boys will be home tomorrow," she said again, a little more loudly. Tuck twitched and the smile vanished. He opened his eyes. "Why'd you have to wake me up?" he sighed. "I was having that dream again, the good one where we're all in heaven and never heard a tree gap." May sat there frowning, a great potato of a woman with a round, sensible face and calm brown eyes. "It's no use having that dream," she said. "Nothing's going to change." "You tell me that every day," said Tuck, turning away from her onto his side. "Anyway, I can't help what I dream." "Maybe not," said May, "but all the same, you should have gotten used to things by now." Tuck groaned. "I'm going back to sleep," he said. "Not me," said May. "I'm going to take the horse and go down to the wood to meet them." "Meet who?" "The boys, Tuck, our sons. I'm going to ride down to meet them." "Better not do that," said Tuck. "I know," said May, "but I just can't wait to see them. Anyways, it's 10 years since I went to Tree Gap. No one will remember me. I'll ride in at sunset just to the wood. I won't go into the village, but even if someone did see me, they won't remember. They never did before now, did they?" "Suit yourself, then," said Tuck into his pillow. "I'm going back to sleep." May Tuck climbed out of bed and began to dress. 3 petticoats, a rusty brown skirt, and one enormous pocket, an old cotton jacket, and a knit shawl, which she pinned across her bosom with a tarnished metal brooch. The sounds of her dressing were so familiar to Tuck that he could say without opening his eyes, "You don't need that shawl in the middle of summer." May ignored his observation. Instead, she said, "Will you be all right? I won't be back till late tomorrow." Tuck rolled over and made a rueful face at her. "What in the world could possibly happen to me?" "That's so," said May. "I keep forgetting." "I don't," said Tuck. "Have a nice time." And in a moment, he was asleep again. May sat on the edge of the bed and pulled on a pair of short leather boots so thin and soft with age it was a wonder they still held together. Then she stood and took from the washstand beside the little bed a square-shaped object, a music box painted with roses and lilies of the valley. It was the one pretty thing she owned, and she never went anywhere without it. Her fingers strayed to the winding key in the bottom, but glancing at the sleeping Tuck, she shook her head, gave the little box a pat, and dropped it into her pocket. Then, last of all, she pulled down over her ears a blue straw hat with a drooping, exhausted brim. But before she put on the hat, she brushed her gray-brown hair and wound it into a bun at the back of her neck. She did this quickly and skillfully without a single glance in the mirror. May Tuck didn't need a mirror, though she had one propped up on the washstand. She knew very well what she would see in it. Her reflection had long since ceased to interest her. For May Tuck and her husband, and Miles and Jessie too, had all looked exactly the same for 87 years. If you want to know what happens in this story next, pick up a copy at your school library, maybe your classroom library, your favorite local indie bookstore, or if you can't find them in any of those places, you can grab it from the link down in the description box below. I hope you have a great week, great weekend. Happy reading, and I'll see you here again next time. To continue reading Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt, check one out from your school library, purchase it from a local indie bookstore, or if you can't find it there, grab it from the link in the description box. Then make sure you check out the rest of the First Chapter Friday playlist. I have tons of great middle grade and YA stories waiting for you, one for each week of the year. Today's mystery quote says, "Don't be afraid of death. Be afraid of an unlived life." Please like this video and subscribe so you can stay connected for more great First Chapter Friday videos and other videos you can use in your classroom. Happy reading!